Oh, hey, yes. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about ICE and this whole debacle that's kind of unfolding. Most of my information that has come from the mainstream media, including Reuters, the Washington Post, and Time. And I'm just going to mix in some critical thinking skills and lay it out there because we know that this is all a game being played. So maybe we can get to a small piece of the puzzle and discover some truths maybe along the way. I'm going to sit right here in the middle, but according to The Guardian, Senate Democrats blocked a bill to fund the Department of the Homeland Security, the DHS, ahead of a deadline, which means a partial DH shutdown is looming. The fight is over immigration enforcement guardrails, okay? Here's a part that nobody wants you to notice because it makes the drama look dramatic. The Guardian also reports that ICE and CBP don't really lose funding here, okay? Because they've already got a huge pot of money from last year's legislation, so a shutdown hits TSA, FEMA, Coast Guard, cybersecurity, and all those other DHS components that people actually bump into, like in everyday life. Well, they're gone, right? They'll be the ones affected. That's important because it means that the shutdown is leverage, right? So what are Democrats arguing, okay? Well, here's what they're basically saying. Quote, we'll fund DHS, but not this version of DHS where immigration enforcement is operating like a free-range tactical unit with blurry rules. And according to Reuters, their demands, as reported across multiple outlets, include things like they don't want face coverings on them, they don't want masks, they want clear ID and badge numbers for the ICE agents and the CBP agents, body cameras and procedures to make footage available for investigations, judicial warrants before agents enter private property or homes, and limits on enforcement at schools, churches, hospitals, polling places, courts, etc., what we call sensitive locations, and more access for lawyers to detainees and fewer obstacles to congressional oversight visits, okay? Some proposals also touch use of force standards and explicit bans on racial profiling. Well, so why are they punishing this now? Well, once again, The Guardian says that because there's been a lot of backlash tied to immigration enforcement operations and high-profile incidents, a major pressure point mentioned repeatedly is the shooting deaths of the 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis, which ignited the political wildfire around what are the rules here and who's accountable when things go wrong. The Washington Post states that the warrant issue is not a vibes debate. It's the core constitutional question. Can federal immigration agents force entry into a home using an administrative warrant instead of a judicial warrant? That's a live dispute with reporting around internal guidance and legal criticisms, okay? The Democratic pitch is this. If you're carrying guns, making arrests, entering homes, detaining people, and sometimes making mistakes that wreck lives, you should have the same baseline controls that other law enforcement deal with. That's their why. And in my opinion, their strongest point that I found while reading is transparency really isn't radical. ID and body cams are normal expectations in modern policing, right? Now, their weakest point, in my opinion, is that they're using a funding deadline to force policy changes, and the blast radius of it is the TSA workers and national security functions, not the actual agency that they're mad at. And what are Republicans arguing? Well, the Republicans in the administration are saying that you're trying to tie agents' heads while they're doing what the voters told us to do. Enforce immigration law. Ain't it funny how they'll use the voters when it's convenient? Their main objections from the Reuters and Washington Post were this. Forcing agents to remove masks and plaster identifiable info everywhere could endanger agents and their families, especially if doxing's a real fear. Some Democratic demands are framed as operationally impractical, like requiring judicial warrants in situations they claim need speed. They argue that Democrats are basically using outrage over a rare tragedy to cripple a broader enforcement mission, and that thousands of arrests happen every day by the book. And they also want punishments for sanctuary cities that won't cooperate as part of the broader enforcement posture, though even Reuters notes legal complications. No clean legal definition and limits on forcing local governments to carry out federal programs. Okay, so what's their strongest point, in my opinion? I'll tell you. Agent safety is a legitimate concern. And also policy by hostage deadline is a trash way to govern. Everybody knows that. What's their weakest point, in my opinion? Well, I think it's the trust us isn't oversight. If you oppose transparency tools like body cam, access rules, and ID requirements, you're basically asking the public to accept kind of accountability happens internally, which we all know and have seen that movie in the end usually winds up with a paid vacation somewhere, right? Listen, I'm just sitting here as a regular citizen watching Congress do what it does best, turn a real issue into a staged cage match where everyone gets fundraising emails and nobody has to fix the machine. Because that's what this is. It's a fight over rules of force, wrapped in a budget deadline delivered just kind of like a reality TV cliffhanger. So let's start with the basic truth that really is hard to dodge. If you are a federal agent with the authority to detain people, search, arrest, and kick indoors, you don't get to operate in a fog, man. That's not anti-law enforcement. That's pro-civilization. Masking up while armed and unidentified might make tactical sense in those small scenarios. But as a standard operating style in a country where the government is supposed to answer to the people, that's kind of how you breed panic, mistakes, and abuse. Just saying. Reuters literally lays out the demands, which is ditch the mask, like wear legible IDs, the body cams, and clear rules for footage, access, and misconduct investigations. And Democrats, for once in their life, are making a point it's really not hard to laugh at. Body cameras and identification are not communist mind control devices. Police departments across America already deal with this stuff. We see it all over YouTube. All the body cam footage. But here's where I turn. I'm going to stare into the camera at Democrats too. If you actually think that DHS is out of control, if you really believe this is a rights crisis, why are you letting the shutdown hit TSA, FEMA, the Coast Guard, cybersecurity, while ICE and CBP keep rolling because they are already funded? That's not a precision strike. That's just a tantrum that's going to have some collateral damage. And for the Republicans, don't act like you're the protectors of working Americans here. Your side is the one that loves to talk about law and order until somebody says, cool, then show your badge number and keep the body camera on. If the mission's legitimate transparency is your friend, if your agents are doing everything by the book, then the book should be visible. The footage should exist and the badge should be readable. Now, the biggest issue that should terrify everyone on the left, on the right, and the leave me alone type, this whole home entry warrant mess, all right? The home is supposed to be sacred under the Fourth Amendment. That's not a partisan slogan, man. That's the spine of the whole deal we call America. And yet we got serious reporting and legal arguments swirling around whether immigration enforcement is being guided to treat administrative warrants like judicial warrants when it comes to entering someone's home. And just for clarification, okay, what's a judicial warrant? Well, that's a warrant that's signed by a judge with a neutral check and an administrative warrant signed inside of an agency. And if you can't sit there and say, well, they use all their blue state judges, then elect some new ones in. If we slide into a world where an agency can sign its own paperwork and use that as a battering ram into private homes, you've just redesigned the Constitution just into its own suggestion box, dude. And you don't have to be pro-immigration or anti-immigration to see the danger. A power created for one target always gets used on the next target. That's not paranoia, that's history. So Democrats are pushing judicial warrants for home entry. That's not crazy. That's just constitutional hygiene. And if Republicans are resisting that, they need to explain in plain English why they want less judicial oversight of forceful entry into somebody's house. Not just because of safety or the border. Explain why a judge is somehow optional when the government wants to enter someone's home. That's not hard. So, Democrats kind of want to enforce limits near churches, schools, hospitals, polling places, and courts, okay? And Republicans argue that hard boundaries like this create loopholes. People will hide. Criminals will exploit it, and enforcement becomes theater. Then my thought is play the game, sucker, and wait them out. If you know that Jose's in a home or a church or a hospital, a school, then I promise he will eventually F up. He has to come out. And if you're keeping your eyes trained on him, he won't be committing any violent crimes. So there's your wiggle room to get what you want and still keep our streets safe. We don't want hospitals or churches becoming hunting grounds. We also don't want blanket safe zones that can be gamed. So really the only sane answer is not always or never. It's clear rules, narrow expectations, documentation, and after-the-fact review. And guess what tool makes after-the-fact review possible? Body cams, ID, paper trail, oversight. Can you not see the game that's being played? You know the stuff we're fighting about, right? It's ridiculous. Here are the tangible facts that makes this whole thing smell political. The shutdown pressure mostly harms, like we've talked about, the ICE and the CBP because they have already been funded very heavily. And both sides are timing this right up against a deadline and then leaving town because nothing says public service like lighting the fuse and then going on recess. Republicans get to say Democrats are defunding security, and Democrats get to say Republicans are defending rogue enforcement, and both messages raise money. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold. This standoff is not just about policy. It's about owning the friggin' narrative. Republicans want a visible symbol of enforcement strength and don't want Congress micromanaging the optics of raids. Democrats want a visible symbol of civil liberties defense and don't want to look like they funded enforcement without some guardrails. So, in my most cynical but plausible twist, is both sides prefer the fight to the fix because the fight produces cleaner campaign messaging than a nuanced compromise. And the most brutal irony of it all, and even Reuters points out that the Republicans want to punish sanctuary cities ideas runs into legal problems and fuzzy definitions. Meaning this whole thing can turn into symbolic punishment. Attempts that courts slap down later, which then becomes another fundraising loop, man. It's all about the damn money. Why are my glasses always crooked? What accountability will actually look like? If anybody in Washington wanted to solve it like grown-ups, well, we already kind of talked about it. Let's talk about it real quick again. The package is that body cameras for roving ICE agents and operations need to have legally defined retention plus release rules for investigations. Visible ID and badge numbers ain't that hard with limited exemptions for truly sensitive ops. Signed off by a supervisor and logged. Judicial warrant requirements for home entry with narrow emergency exceptions defined by law, dude, not vibes. Sensitive locations policy with narrow expectations, documentation, and review. And separate funding so TSA, Coast Guard, FEMA aren't bargaining chips. Even Democrats are floating variants of that idea. That's it. Not revolutionary, just kind of functional, right? Back in the day, we used to agree on these types of things across the aisles. Here's the bottom line. As a citizen who's tired of being treated like a damn pawn, I don't care what party you're in. If you want the power to arrest people in their homes, you don't get to be anonymous. You don't get to be unrecorded. You don't get to treat the Constitution like it's an optional accessory. And if you're so outraged by enforcement abuses that you'll blow up DHS funding, then don't pretend it's noble while the actual pain lands on the TSA screeners and Coast Guard families who still have to show up and work through this chaos. This whole thing is a test, not just of immigration policy, but a test of whether we still believe that power should be visible, reviewable, and accountable. Because if we cannot agree on that, then the only border left is the one between the government and the governed. And once that line hardens, nobody wins. Not the left, not the right, not the guy in the middle trying to pay his bills and keep his kids safe while Washington auditions for the next WrestleMania match. That's all I have for today, folks. I hope you all are doing good. Stay positive. Keep your head up. Walk tall. And remember, Christ is King. Later, Gators.